As we move into the Middle English period, language and literature take on a new form. Old English slowly disappears after the Norman conquest, giving way to Anglo-French and then Middle English, which in time evolves into the English we recognize today. This period is marked by the Norman and Angevin dynasties, ongoing class struggles between kings, nobles, clergy and commoners, and frequent wars with France, Scotland and Wales. Pause here because this is an exam anchor. The three main dialects of Middle English were Northern, based on Northumbrian, Midland, based on Mercian, and Southern, based on Kentish and other southern varieties. These varieties was asked in exam. Each gave rise to distinctive writers and texts. From the Northern dialect we have the Chaucer Mundi, an anonymous religious epic. The Chaucer Mundi was asked in exam. And Lawrence Minot, who around 1350 composed vigorous political poems reflecting the turbulence of his age. From the Midland dialect, which is the most important for literary history, we have the giants. Geoffrey Chaucer, whose Canterbury Tales in East Midland dialect became the foundation of English literature. William Langland, author of Piers Plowman, a major allegorical poem reflecting class struggle and spiritual corruption. And the anonymous Gawain poet, also called the Pearl poet, who gave us Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, written in the West Midlands dialect. The Midland dialect, in fact, is the one that gradually evolved into Standard English. This specific dialect was asked in exam. From the Southern dialect, we find John Gower, who wrote Confessio Amantis in Southern English. It was once asked in exam, though he also wrote in Latin and French. And earlier, Layamon, whose Brute retold the story of Britain in an early Southern Middle English dialect. It's worth noting that Middle English poets drew heavily on French and Latin models, yet native traditions like alliteration resurfaced, particularly in works like Piers Plowman and Sir Gawain. Much literature remained anonymous, showing the communal and transitional character of the age. And then there's one of the most curious figures of the 14th century, John Mandeville. His Voyage and Travels of Sir John Mandeville, written originally in French around 1356, was translated into English around 1375. It claimed to recount journeys beginning in 1322, but most of its tales about Prester John, the lost tribes, and wonders of the East were borrowed from other travel books and encyclopedias. Written in the Midland dialect, this particular dialect and work was recently asked in exam. It was long popular, but later exploration revealed how inaccurate and fanciful it was. Even the existence of Mandeville himself is doubtful. Yet the text shaped medieval imagination about the wider world. So the Middle English period is a time of dialect diversity, French influence, and emerging national identity. Remember the big anchors for exams: Chaucer Mundi for the North, Chaucer and Langland for the Midlands, Gower for the South, and Mandeville's travel book as the most famous example of medieval wonder tales. When we study medieval English literature, one fact stands out right away. Poetry dominates. The majority of surviving texts from this period are in verse rather than prose. And for clarity, we can classify these poems into three broad groups: rhyming chronicles, religious and didactic poetry, and metrical romances. Let's begin with the rhyming chronicles. These were verse histories, unusually abundant in this period. The most important is Layamon's Brute, written around 1205, a chronicle poem that connects Britain's origins to Arthurian legend. We also have Robert of Gloucester, famous for his rhyming history, and Robert Manning of Brunei, who lived between 1264 and 1340. His story of England, composed in 1338, traces English king's lineage all the way back to Noah, while his Handling Sin of 1303 adapts a French text as a religious manual. Don't forget Lawrence Minot, around 1350, who wrote 11 spirited political songs. Next comes religious and didactic poetry, the largest group. Much of it was imitative and extremely long. A key text here is the Ormulum, written around 1200 by Orm or Ormin. Then we have the lively debate poem, The Owl and the Nightingale, from about 1250, attributed to Nicholas of Guildford. Pause here, this one has been asked in exam. Other mid-13th century works include Orison to Our Lady, Genesis and Exodus, the Bestiary, the Moral Ode, Proverbs of Alfred, and Proverbs of Hending. Later, Cursor Mundi from around 1320 gave us a vast religious epic of 24,000 lines in a northern dialect. Richard Rolle of Hampole, who died in 1349, was another notable poet of religious devotion. And we cannot miss the anonymous alliterative poems from the West Midlands, Pearl, Clearness, Patience, and the famous Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. Finally, we come to metrical romances, the most popular kind of medieval poetry. These narratives can be grouped by theme. In popular romances, we find Horn, Havelock the Dane, Guy of Warwick, and Bevis of Hampton. Under Arthurian romances, we encounter Sir Tristram, Arthur and Merlin, Wyvern and Gawain, Morte d'Arthur, and again Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. The classical themes gave us King Alexander, Sir Orfeo, and the destruction of Troy. Under Charlemagne romances, we have the alliterative Ralph, Coilier, and Sir Ferumbras. And finally, the contemporary romances such as Amis and Amilone, William of Palerne with its missing heir theme, and The Squire of Low Degree, a tale involving the king's daughter of Hungary. So, to sum up, medieval poetry flourished in three forms: chronicles, religious verse, and romances. Together, these works carried history, morality, imagination, and storytelling across centuries, shaping the English literary tradition long before Chaucer arrived. Two key works mark the rise of Middle English prose. First, Ancren Riule, or The Rule of Anchoresses, written around 1200 for a small religious community of women in Somersetshire. It is one of the earliest Middle English prose texts. Its style is simple and matter of fact, with traces of the Midland dialect. Though the author is unknown, it is often seen as a forerunner of modern English prose. Second, Iron Bite of Invite, composed around 1340 by Dan Michel of Northgate. It's a literal translation of a French devotional work. While it has little literary value, it is invaluable for philologists because it preserves the southern dialect of Middle English. So remember, Ancren Riule for early prose simplicity and Iron Bite of Invite for its dialectal importance. As we move from Old English into Middle English, one of the most exciting things to notice is how literary forms themselves developed and transformed. Let's begin with poetry. In Old English, poetry relied on heavy alliteration, but by the Middle English period, this changed. We see the rise of the modern system of rhymed meters, which gradually replaced the old alliterative verse. And here's something exam relevant. There's a long gap in English poetry between Sinew Ulf's Old English poems written around 950 and the Middle English Brut composed around 1205. It was asked in exam. This gap marks the slow transition in style and form. Another delightful innovation was the lyric. While popular songs surely existed in Old English times, it was only in the 13th century that they were preserved in manuscripts. These lyrics stand out for their sweetness and musical power, giving us some of the earliest glimpses of personal, emotional expression in English. We also get the flourishing of the metrical romances. Originally, the word romance simply meant works written in the Romance languages. But soon it came to mean tales of adventure, chivalry, and knights on quests. Now let's talk about prose. In the Middle English period, prose was still practical, used for religious tracts, translations, or instruction. The real flowering of prose as a literary form came later. But there's one genre we must highlight here, the chivalric romance. Chivalric romance could appear in verse or prose, but its essence was the same. These were stories about heroic knights, loyal to their code of honor, often caught between duty, loyalty, and courtly love. Some of the most famous examples are tied to the Arthurian tradition. Think of Lancelot by Chrétien de Troyes in the late 12th century, Sir Gawain and the Green Knight in the late 14th century. This particular chivalry romance was asked in exam. And Le Morte d'Arthur by Thomas Malory in 1485. It was asked in exam. We also have the Lancelot Grail or Prose Lancelot, a French source that shaped much of the later Arthurian legend. Let's explore 3 landmark works that shaped the Romance tradition in English: King Horn, Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, and Le Morte d'Arthur. Each one connects us to medieval ideals of heroism, loyalty, and the Arthurian imagination. We start with King Horn, one of the earliest Middle English romances, composed in the mid-13th century. It was based on the Anglo-Norman romance of Horn. From around 1170, the story follows Horn, son of King Ailoffe of Suddeney, whose parents are slain by Saracens. Exiled, he grows up in Brittany and falls in love with Rigmel, the king's daughter. Wrongfully accused, he is banished to Ireland, where he again proves his courage, even refusing the hand of a princess. Finally, he returns to Brittany, restores justice, and marries Rigmel. This tale belongs to the Matter of England tradition, where local legends and national identity shaped early Romance literature. Now, let's move to one of the greatest Arthurian poems, Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. Written in the late 14th century in alliterative verse, this poem places us in King Arthur's court. The Green Knight bursts into the round table, issuing a strange challenge. Strike him with an axe now, but take a return blow in a year's time. Gawain beheads him, but the Green Knight calmly picks up his head and reminds him of their pact. A year later, Gawain's honor is tested in a castle where both a lord and a lady try his integrity. The poem survives in a single manuscript, Cotton Nero AX, alongside pearl, cleanness, and patience. All 4 are attributed to the mysterious pearl poet or Gawain poet who wrote in the Northwest Midlands dialect. These pearl poets was once asked in exam. Finally, we reach Le Morte d'Arthur, perhaps the most famous Arthurian work in English. Written by Sir Thomas Malory and published in 1485 by William Caxton, this particular point was asked in exam. It brings together tales of Arthur, Guinevere, Lancelot, and the Knights of the Round Table. Malory drew from French and English sources, but he reshaped them into 21 books. These cover Arthur's rise, the creation of the Round Table, the adventures of knights, the quest for the Holy Grail, and Arthur's tragic death. Malory's work was written during the Wars of the Roses, and beneath the chivalric splendor is a subtle criticism of his own time. He laments the decline of loyalty and honor, comparing the opportunism of nobles with the noble behavior of Arthur's knights. Stylistically, it's richly detailed, with rubrication the names of characters and places written in red for emphasis. And among its famous moments is Arthur's wedding to Guinevere, where Merlin explains the Round Table's ancient legacy passed down from Uther Pendragon. Before we meet William Caxton, let's first step into the pre-printing era. For centuries, books were painstakingly handwritten, usually on parchment. Only in the 14th century did paper begin arriving in England, imported from Genoa, France, and the Rhine. Then came a revolution, Johannes Gutenberg's invention of the printing press around 1450 in Germany. By the late 15th century, printed books had already reached London, though at first they came only through imports. Enter William Caxton, born in Kent around 1422. He apprenticed as a mercer in London and later moved to Bruges, where he also worked as a diplomat. During his time abroad, he learned the new art of printing in Cologne. And here's a key exam anchor. In 1474 or 75, Caxton printed the Recueil of the Histories of Troy, the very first English language printed book asked in exam. But his influence did not stop there. In 1485, Caxton also published Sir Thomas Malory's Le Morte d'Arthur. This particular date was asked in exam, which remains one of the greatest works of Arthurian literature. In 1476, Caxton returned to England and set up his printing press near Westminster Abbey. His first English printed book was Dictates or Sayings of the Philosophers in 1477. From there, his publishing business expanded rapidly. By 1488, he was importing over 1,000 books in just 2 months, an astonishing number for the time. Caxton went on to print around 100 books, including Chaucer's Canterbury Tales and The Game and Play of Chess. What's remarkable is his audience. He wasn't targeting nobles alone. His books were crafted for the growing middle class, offering popular translations, pamphlets, and story collections like Reynard the Foxey. His craftsmanship and careful editing earned him a reputation as both a printer and a cultural curator. After Caxton's death in 1491, his assistant Wynkyn de Worde took over. By 1500, Wynkyn had moved the press to Fleet Street, a location that would become the heart of London's printing industry for centuries. So when you think of William Caxton, remember these anchors. The Recueil of the Histories of Troy. Again, it was asked in exam as the first English printed book. The Malory's Le Morte d'Arthur in 1485. It was too asked in exam. And his role in establishing printing in London as both a craft and a business. With Caxton, English literature moved from the manuscript age into the world of mass readership.